What's up, all you beautiful 3's, 4's, and 5's? It's me, it's Coach White. I'm here with Test Hack, and now we're going to look at Unit 4 so we can dominate that test on College Board, take all that money, and not have any student debt. Let's go. Unit 4, Geopolitics. First, what are politics? Well, it's about boundaries. What is a boundary? Well, it's what you and your girlfriend have established. Okay, never mind. A boundary is a vertical plane cut through the land, and it divides the airspace, the water, the land. It's vertical. We can see that there's two types of boundaries we need to know about. First is natural boundaries. Second, geometric. A natural boundary is exactly what it sounds like. It's something that happens in nature. Lakes, ponds, creeks, mountains, all those things. Let's look at some big ones. Over here, we can see the subcontinent of Asia. We can see it's surrounded by Himalayas and the Hindu Kush. This area right here is known as the Khyber Pass. It often is letting people through. Down here we see in South America some rivers. The Parana River that divides and facilitates trade and divides up these countries of Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. These are natural boundaries. So mountains and rivers are perfect for natural boundaries because you can see them. And before we knew how to measure things and triangulate using GPS, they were awesome. So India and Pakistan and Bangladesh have always been cut off by what's known as a natural boundary of the Himalayas and the Hindu Kush. There is the Khyber Pass here. This is the only small way between Pakistan and Afghanistan back in the day. It still exists today. You can see it right here in this gate. Rivers are nice because you can see this is an international boundary between three countries. It also facilitates trade across these. Geometric boundaries. I know what you're thinking. Oh God, geometry. I got a factor or something. Here's the only factor you need to know. Geometric boundaries are easy to spot because they're perfectly straight lines because they use lines of latitude and longitude. Look at this. Out west, where four corners is, look at these beautifully straight right angles, perpendicular. Oh my gosh. Those are geometric boundaries. So if some nerd laid it down on a map and it's a perfectly straight line, it's geometric. If it follows nature, it's a natural boundary. In America, we have a few. The East Coast tends to be more natural boundaries, as known as meets and bounds, because the use of rivers, seen here, Ohio, the Mississippi, all those rivers were used to delineate between different states. Whereas over here in the West, once we got smarter and we were able to send out surveyors with their triangulation tools, they can create these boundaries. All right, those are boundaries. Now let's look at some different types of boundaries. These are consequent or cultural boundaries. This is a boundary between two different types of cultures, typically language or religion. Let's find three examples that you might be able to use to dominate that FRQ and destroy the College Board. All right, the first one, intra-faith boundary. We find this on the Emerald Isle here with Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland. If you don't know anything about Ireland, 1, leprechauns aren't real. 2, Ireland is known as a Catholic country, right? Irish Catholic. The North is a Protestant country. However, it is intra-faith because these are both Christians. And the fact that they have a separate country here is a consequent boundary, and it divides the Protestant North from the Catholic South. That's intra-faith. Oh, what about interfaith? Great question, Billy. Interfaith, we can see in the subcontinent. Britain used to rule all of the subcontinent. Then, about 1948, they divided it, and you created what's known as the partition. And we can see here, this would be an interfaith consequent boundary between Muslim in the red and Hindu in the blue. So we can see Pakistan and East Pakistan, today known as Bangladesh. They were majority Muslim, and then we can see India is the majority Hindu country. So that would be a different type of boundary here. Last one we're going to look at is ethnic boundary. And ethnic is really broad. It generally has to do with language and customs. And Eastern Europe is just ripe with all these different ethnic groups. We can see them over here on this map. I would hit pause right now, look at some of these groups, and they can see they're self-identifying to create these different boundaries all in Eastern Europe. That's why Eastern Europe has all these little ethnic enclaves, as they call them. And we can see these groups have self-identified. They've created sovereignty for themselves. All right, boundary origins. Let's start up here in the top left. This is an antecedent boundary. I know your English teacher tells you about prefixes, suffixes, and fixes, whatever. Ante means before. So an antecedent boundary is a boundary that existed before people settled out there. So we can see in this generic thing from the internet, I found country A and country B. That's lame. But if we look at Canada and the US, before they were completely settled in the mid-1800s, the Canada and U.S. decided to create along the 49th parallel this antecedent boundary and no one lived there. All right, next. Subsequent. Sub, we all know from the prefix, means after. This is some sort of dispute or agreement. It means afterwards. And the biggest subsequent boundary we can see, we already looked at Ireland, Northern Ireland with the interfaith conflict. But with Korea, Koreans are both Koreans, right? North Koreans and South Koreans both are Korean. They speak Korean. But the difference is communism and capitalism. And we can see this is a subsequent boundary drawn between them from the Korean War from 1950 to 1953, still ongoing. That's a subsequent boundary. Another one, oftentimes referenced on the exam, superimposed. Superimposed, we see a lot of these in Africa during the imperial age because European countries are going out trying to explore the world, create wealth, generate wealth, bring in mercantilism. And we can see from this drawing here, it's when a bigger power will just superimpose or draw over the land a new boundary without regard to who is there already. So we can see that France would just kind of lump massive groups of people here, and Britain would lump massive groups of people here in Africa. You should know Africa is the most diverse continent in the world, has the most ethnicities, the most languages, all of those. And during colonialism, there was lots of superimposed boundaries on Africa, and it led to a lot of the wars we see today. Last type of boundary we're looking at is relic. And relic means really, really, really old. And a really, really, really old boundary, actually it's not that old, is the Berlin Wall. We can see up here, the Berlin Wall was used to separate Berlin from communism. That keeps coming up again. The communist East from the democratic capitalist West here. And it used to divide, it was physically a wall. But now, if you go there, there's just a light post kind of illuminating where it once stood. You can pass freely among this light post, but it's just merely highlighting that this used to be a boundary right there. So there's some types of boundary origins you should look at. Let's look at state shapes. State shapes are often on this test, and we'll look at the first shape. Compact states. France exhibits this one perfectly. A compact state is almost equidistant from the center. It allows it to defend its borders well, trade well, and yeah, it's a really good shape. You'll notice a lot of European countries are compact in nature. Prorupted. Prorupted is compact with like little growth on the edge. And we see Thailand exhibits this, and you can see that this part of Thailand is pretty cohesive. However, this large growth down here, this proruption, leads to an isolated part of Thailand, and maybe it struggles to identify with the rest of Thailand. But that's a prorupted shape. Perforated and enclave. These have to go together. They're like peanut butter jelly. They're like Yuan Bay. All right. South Africa has within its border the country of Lesotho. And Lesotho is an enclave because it is completely surrounded by South Africa. South Africa has a great relationship with Lesotho because they know that they need each other, right? Lesotho is landlocked. And this type of complementary agreement exists extremely rare, all right? Another type of state we see is fragmented. Indonesia and Philippines, they have the most islands in the entire world, which makes for beautiful coastlines. However, it makes for a difficulty in unifying and creating the centripetal force of the country because since there's 6,000 islands, they don't feel all that they're together. Maybe each island feels kind of like its own country, its own area. It's independent from the rest. That creates problems. An exclave can be good or bad. It can be bad because it's disconnected. But in this case with Russia and Kaliningrad here, this is Kaliningrad. It's a little part of Poland that Russia partitioned. And while it's far away from Russia, it actually gives Russia the advantage of having a warm water port along the Baltic Sea. So it depends how you look at it, but exclave is a part of the country that is disconnected from the rest. The last one we're going to look at is elongated, and Chile is the best here in highlighting this. Now, Chile suffers from having the Andes Mountains along it, so that's one disadvantage. But it's just so long that it makes it where it's not completely conducive to trade. Isolation occurs. Plus in the south, you have fragmentation occurring, but elongated means it's long in itself. All right. Let's look at some other things we might see on this AP Human test in May. What is a nation? I've often said, one nation under God. A nation is technically a group of people who have the same background. So they're homogeneous, which means they have the same background, the same language, the same beliefs, same customs, everything. Sometimes there's groups of people that are the same and they actually don't have a country. An example of that would be the Kurds. The Kurds are a group of people that are mostly in Turkey, but they're not a majority there. And there's a little bit in Syria, not a majority. A little bit in Iraq and a little bit in Iran. They're not a majority. And the Kurds desperately want their own state, but they are what's called a stateless nation. So remember, nation is a group of people with the same beliefs, languages, upbringing, customs. All right. A nation state is a country who everyone in the state is the exact same. Great examples are Iceland and Japan, and you got to think about this because they're so insular. They're disconnected. Iceland's cut off. There's only 13 families in Iceland. Japan, very much against immigration. They want everyone in Japan to be Japanese. They want everyone to speak Japanese. They want us to be Japanese, and they have a shared ancestry. So a nation state is where everyone is the same. There's very few of these. You also have what's called a multinational state. So we already know a state is a country, a nation is a group of people. Multi, from your English teacher, thanks, what's up, means many. So this means many people living in a country. Okay, so America is a multinational state. A better example would be Yugoslavia, because Yugoslavia suffered from being occupied by communist Soviet Union. And in 1989, they started to break apart. And they went from Yugoslavia to these few countries to start self-identifying themselves based on their nation of people there. And we can see by now they've created from one country to about 8 countries. And they're still self-identifying today because these little ethnic nations want to create their own country. What can break apart a state? Well, a country can often break apart with 3 what's known as devolutionary forces. And a devolutionary force is a centrifugal force that moves power from the center out to the edges. So centrifugal means moving apart. And we have 3 types. The first would be ethnocultural, economic, and then spatial. Let's start with ethnocultural. We've been talking about the Soviet Union ruled all these people. And after they fell, we can see up here that the green plus yellow is the Soviet Union. They controlled all these people. They put them under their yoke. And then once they fell, these countries wanted to be self-identified. And so we can see in Eastern Europe over here, these countries, you can see there's an ethnic group and they want to identify. So we can see right here, the Romanians live in Romania. And that makes sense. And there's this small pocket or enclave of Magyars here who are technically, they identify as Hungarian. We can see most Slovaks live in Slovakia, except for a tiny little bit of Magyars. Poland is a great example of a nation state. Look at that. Most everyone in Poland is what we would call a Pole. So you're starting to see how these countries got their name, and it's from these people self-identifying. We see it down here in the former Yugoslavia. And this part of the world is called the Eastern Bloc. And this part is actually called a shatter belt. And the reason they call this part of the world a shatter belt is because it's constantly a swath of land that is breaking over and over and over again. And the reason they're breaking is because they want to create self-identified governments that represent their nations. So they want to be nation states. They do not want to be multinational states. And they don't want to be a state of people ruled by an outside nation. We also saw this. We saw it in the FRQ a few years ago. The Basque is a group of people in northern Spain, southern France, who have no linguistic connection to the French or the Spanish, and they're very much a territoriality of people. They want to create their own land, their own government, their own language, their own money, their own dress, and they feel different, and they feel that they need to self-identify, which means gain their own sovereignty. Economic devolution is the second of the 3 types we'll look at, and this occurs a lot in Barcelona, Spain. So Barcelona, Spain is famous for a few things, banking and soccer, right? And it's also the richest part of Spain, and this part of Spain feels a little snooty. They actually have, if you see up here, this is their own flag. This is the Catalan flag, and they have their own type of Spanish. They don't speak Spanish, they speak Catalan, and they want to break away from the rest of Spain. So that would be economic devolution. So we see cultural, this is economic. The last one's spatial. Remember, spatial means distance. So another type of spatial devolution occurs in Hawaii. Now, Hawaii is a U.S. state. However, is oftentimes this group of people, they want to create their own sovereignty. And sovereignty is this word that means power or ability to pass your own laws, because Hawaii was taken over by a bunch of fruit farmers that were making all this money off of pineapple and sugarcane, and they overthrew Queen Liliuokalani, and now they want to disassociate with the U.S. and create their own country again, or their own nation state called Hawaii. So those are 3 types of devolution that, kind of threaten statehood. What else will threaten statehood? Supranationalism. Now, supranationalism sounds like, some Mary Poppins, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious word, but supranationalism is when 3 or more states get involved and they make a pact. It's kind of like when you and your friends make a pact. It's like, hey, all of us are going to do this together, and no matter what. And if one of us doesn't, the rest of us aren't. But in supranationalism, instead of you and your friends, it's countries. It has to be 3 more countries. And one of the oldest supranational organizations is called the UN. And the UN was created after World War II to settle disagreements between states and to help prevent another world war, because the one before this, the League of Nations, failed. You also have another supranational group in Europe. It's called the European Union. This is where the countries came together to facilitate trade, create a common currency, and stop having to, check passports at international borders. However, you lose a little bit of sovereignty to gain this benefit of financial fluidity. NATO is another supranational organization they like to ask about on the FRQs and the AP exam. These are the countries of Western Europe and North America banding together to defeat communism and the Soviet Union. It's still together today, watching Russia pretty much, and protecting each other. Another supranational organization is ASEAN, and this is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and it's at 10 countries. It's basically the EU of Southeast Asia to participate or to promote participation in economic growth and political and military cooperation. The Arctic Council came together to prevent countries from overtaking the Arctic Circle and to promote cooperation and stop climate change. And the last one we're going to look at is the African Union. And you guessed it, it's exactly like the European Union, except not in Europe, but in Africa. And it's to increase economics there. Those are 3 topics that will help you destroy the College Board on this Unit 4 review. I hope you do really well on this AP exam. Take that 3, 4, or 5. It's Mr. White, and I'm out.